Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace,
And I'm Blake.
and this is a Spawn Daily episode. We're up to this crazy one-shot graphic novel called Spawn, Blood and Salvation. It was different. I'm glad that we were getting more of what we talked about last episode, which is Daniel, who's this futuristic hellspawn. But I don't know. I'm going to let Blake do the recap on this one because I think he gets more out of it. It is, anybody who's listened to the podcast for a long time knows, is not my style of art at all. And the other thing is there's a lot of scripture in it, which I'll talk about when we do the thoughts at the end, why that kind of threw me off. But that being said, let me share my screen and we'll go ahead and dive right in. All right, Blake, take it away. Well, hold on. This is still set up from the last time. Make sure everybody can see. Okay, Blake, take it away.
Cool. So Blood and Salvation. This is a very interesting issue because this is the conclusion to the Dark Future arc. No one really saw it coming when it came out at the time because Curse of Spawn had ended 2 years previously, but enough people, I guess, mailed in was like, hey, whatever happened to that Daniel character? Like, how did that story end? So eventually, I guess they just got annoyed enough to where they're like, okay, let's actually like conclude this. To my understanding, that's kind of how it went. It is also an issue that Ashley Wood did all the art for. He's very avant-garde. He has a very horror-centric style. And as Jay said, it's not for him. You know, you kind of take it or leave it. It's a very interesting kind of direction, but it leans into that urban horror, dark, psychological kind of art that McFarlane was kind of leaning into. Because of his work on a couple one-shots. This is actually the second one-shot that Ashley Wood did in the Spawn universe. The first one was called Blood and Shadows, and that one we'll get to a little later. That comes a little later in the timeline. But Blood and Salvation is the one we're on now. His work was impressive enough to Todd McFarlane and company, and Ashley Wood was kind of like the head artist for a sub-series, a 16-issue series called The Hellspawn. And it's primarily this kind of art style. It's very interesting. It's very abstract. It's kind of hard to get like solid images on anything. It leaves a lot to the imagination. So because of that, because everything's so abstracted, you kind of have to leave a lot to the imagination. The heavy lifting is really done by the writing and coming through clearly with like character voice and everything, making sure that the characters, when they're speaking, it's very clear who is who. And so you kind of have to give them like different personalities that come through the dialogue. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the art is very interesting. And, you know, I say all the time, this is not my style of art. But I should clarify, this is not my style of art for comics. You know, like if every page of this were up in a gallery, whether it was in this correct order or not, I would enjoy walking through and look because I enjoy looking at the art. But this art, it's not, you know, this in no way is the style of the same kind of sequential storytelling where, you know, I talk a lot when I am reviewing a comic and I'm specifically talking about the art. I talk about the transitions from panel to panel and being able to follow the story. This is, you know, that even beyond the style and being more of a watercolor and an abstract style that Ashley Wood uses, and he's, you know, a very famous artist and well known and well regarded and rightly so. But, you know, his art, there's nothing about his art where, okay, let me look at the transitions from panel to panel to see the storytelling. It's not that. It's more about emotion and impression. And like Blake said, there's a lot left in the imagination. But like I said, it is an ending or a continuation, I guess we'd say, of the story of Daniel Llanso that we talked about last episode. So
yeah. So if you turn the page, we'll see that it opens up on this crow, and it's starting to quote some scripture, and it's mostly world building stuff. It's kind of, for anyone who just like picked up this issue, it's kind of trying to establish like a feel for kind of how the world is. Everything's dead. It all sucks. Then some more scripture, a lot of scripture in this one, as Jace was saying. It's heavy-handed on the biblical themes and everything, almost contrary to kind of what we're used to when in the Spawn series, because a lot of the time in Spawn, the main series and everything, we're constantly exposed to kind of that duality, that gray area where heaven isn't all good and hell isn't all bad. But in here, it's very black and white. Hell is absolutely bad. There is no if, ands, or buts. And heaven is definitely good. No if, ands, or buts. So it's kind of a departure thematically in that sense. So in this kind of concluding episode in the Dark Future arc, it's very heavy-handed on the biblical themes and messaging. So after some more like world building, more scripture, we see Daniel standing there, and this whole story is set shortly after the conclusion of the Dark Future arc, which was Curse of the Spawn #4, Damnation War. So shortly ago, Abaddon was incinerated, and Matthew had been teleported by Daniel to his mother, Madrid. And some time has passed, but not a ton of time. As we'll see, it becomes more apparent later in the story. Moving on, we have a new villain character. This is kind of a pervasive issue, continued from the original Curse of the Spawn arc. Lots of characters. So here we have another new character that we're introduced to. His name is Amon. And here he's giving a rousing speech to his necro soldiers. I'm not entirely sure why you need to give a speech to your necro soldiers. Like, I thought the implication was that they're already kind of like robot zombie hell demons, like obeying like your every command. So this kind of felt a little weird when I was reading it. Like, why is he even talking to them? Like, isn't there like some kind of like telepathic connection or something that makes them have to obey him? But I guess he's got to pep up the troops, Everyone's got an off day. So he's pepping up the troops here. He's telling them how humanity is made from mud, kind of a reference to how Adam was created from the dirt of the earth. He's saying that humanity sucks. They're all bad. We're, pestilence, war, famine, disease, rage, all of that's just the beginning. And here we are. We're going to finish it. We're going to unmask their sins and things like that. And then, all the soldiers are like, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And then we get like a shot of Phlegethanyar, and he's saying like how he's going to unveil how worthless their lord is. And, he's just laughing.
They're fired up.
Yeah, they're feeling it. They're feeling it.
Yeah, for the last battle, as it were.
Then we get a new location. This is the village or town of New Hope. This is, this is kind of what suggests that some time has passed. In the first 4 issues of this arc of content, there is no mention of like a last bastion. It just seemed like they were kind of hiding out in a hole. But now they actually have a town, so that's kind of what makes me think that a little bit of time has passed since the destruction of Abaddon. So yeah, they have this new town called New Hope, and another new character. This guy's name is Crane. This guy is sort of like the mayor of New Hope. He is very aggressive. He wants to just straight up attack New Vatican. He thinks that by ending the anti-pope, that this will be the end of the war. Since the anti-pope is the kind of leader of Hell's armies on Earth, he thinks that if they can get rid of the anti-pope, then they've lost their leader, then the war, will be over. And everyone's like, that's a bad idea. But then some people are agreeing, like, if not now, then when? We have some familiar faces. We've got Civ and Flechette. We've got Madrid and Matthew here. And Civ and Flechette are like, we're not really here for the spiritual mumbo jumbo, like, give us a gun. Let's get to work. Let's go. But there's a lot of opposition to going, because if they go and they fail, it's kind of the end of humanity. So Matthew speaks up and he suggests, hey, what about that hell spawn? He kind of like saved our butts. He saved my butt. And everyone's like, oh, this kid, shut up, stop talking. Obviously, he's talked about it enough to where everyone's like, stop it, not this again.
Yeah, they definitely discount what he's, what he says about being teleported away, and they think it's all kind of his imagination.
Yeah.
No way, why would a hellspawn help us? He's on the other side.
Right. And they never really got to see that side of him. And also we, the audience, know that there's a deeper connection there. To compare it to the main series, Matthew, in this sense, is very much like Cyan is to Al. Like they aren't super close, but they are, in a sense, related. They are connected in a very spiritual kind of way. And Matthew has that connection with Daniel because he's his uncle and his nephew. And Madrid is actually feeling some kind of connection too. She's starting to put these pieces together. She feels like there's something there, but she's not quite making the full connection yet. And Matthew's upset that no one's believing him. And he's like, I was there. I saw this guy change sides. If we get him here, he can help us. And no one wants to believe him. Then we see another familiar face. We are checking in with Abel. Abel, in the first 4 issues, he didn't really have a whole lot to do. He was sort of the infiltrator. He was the spy. He was kidnapped by the anti-pope, and he had his insides all cut up and messed up, and we're told that he was turned into an agent of hell, and he was baptized, and all this nasty evil stuff happened to him, and he looks messed up, and as you can see, he doesn't look any better. He's got messed up hands, his hair, his body, like he's all sorts of messed up. So he's not doing too good, and he's not feeling too good either. It seems that some of his consciousness, his human consciousness, is still in there, and he feels guilty about doing what he did, and he just wants it all to end. He's like, I want this second life to be over. I'm sick of it. I'm damned. Like, I just want peace. And he looks into like a body of water, sees a bone or a stick or something. He picks it up and he's about to ram it into his neck when Daniel intervenes and stops him. He grabs his hand, wrenches the bone or the stick free, and tells him, your work isn't done yet. And this is the first time that we really get to see Daniel in the story since the destruction of Abaddon. When last we saw him, he blew up the tower, he blew up Abaddon, he teleported Matthew away, and then we see his hand like a zombie reaching out of the ground as, skin and material was sloughing off. And that was the last time we saw him. 4 years later, we finally get this one-shot issue. Here he is. He has returned. It seems that in between the time that he blew up Abaddon and when we see him now, a voice has appeared in his head. And he doesn't seem to be fully aware of what the voice is, but we see shortly it is the voice of God himself or herself, itself, themselves. I don't know. God is speaking directly to Daniel and telling him what to do. He told Daniel, hey, you need to wander these wastelands and you're going to bump into Abel and you need to help him. And Daniel's like, okay, cool. I'm not really sure why you chose me, but, I'll do it. And so he bumps into Abel and he stops him from killing himself. And he's like, you're not done. The voice in my head tells me that you still have a purpose. There's something more for you to do. And Abel resists. He doesn't want to believe it. He's like, no, I just want the second death. I want it to be over. And then the finger of God, it says the finger of God touches Abel and he's enveloped in a bright light. And it seems like all of the sin is purged away from him. And he has an actual conversation with God where God tells him, you're now my child again. And I am who I am. And it seems like all of the evil that the anti-pope had poured into Abel is now undone. And now he is an angel of sorts. He is a winged creature. He is a being of light. He is a soldier for heaven. This reminds me a lot to the main series. There's lots of parallels between this arc and the main series. This Abel's transformation into this angel sort of reminds me of the Redeemer and how God and the angels chose like a specific person to be the Redeemer to fight Spawn. But this is kind of like a twist on it because in here, Daniel, the Hellspawn, is actually on the same side as the Redeemer. They have to work together. And initially, after his transformation, Abel has no memory. He has no idea what's going on. And he's kind of taken over. His willpower is enveloped by this light, this heavenly instinct sort of, and he immediately attacks Spawn. He's like, you're a demon, you're a Hellspawn, I need to kill you. And so they fight at first, and Daniel's trying to convince him, no, this isn't how it's supposed to go. And
yeah, I felt kind of bad for Daniel right here. Like he kind of stops this guy from killing himself, brings him back to God. God purges the evil, and then the first thing that Abel does when he's purged of evil is turn around and go, oh, you're a bad guy. Kills him point blank. Like,
just like blast him with this heaven energy or something, it sort of looks like. And
no good deed.
Laying there just smoking.
No good deed goes unpunished. That's the first thing I thought. Poor Daniel.
And then it looks like he picks up like this really nasty looking knife, and he's like, I'm gonna finish this. When I suppose there's a divine intervention ? A demon shows up just now. His name is Flesh. And he likes to collect flesh. Great character name, keeping it simple. He's like this giant humanoid, sort of gorilla-looking creature with lots of hooks and chains and all sorts of nasty stuff on him. He's got beady, tiny red eyes. And his whole thing is he likes to collect the skin of people, and he has lots of like cryogenic compartments all over him to like store the flesh that he collects so he can graft it onto him whenever the stuff that's on him currently decomposes or gets damaged or something. Creepy, nasty character. But in this sort of demonic intervention, Abel and Daniel need to team up in order to beat it. Abel at first is the only one attacking it, and then he nearly gets killed, and so Daniel jumps in and he finishes Flesh, the demon, off. And Abel actually tells him to stop because the rage takes over Daniel, and it's been minutes and he's wailing on this thing, and the thing's been dead for a long time. So it seems now that Abel and Daniel are more or less on the same side. They're like, okay, I may have overreacted a little. All right, let's move on from here. Let's move on from this. Then we're going to switch over to New Vatican. We haven't been here in a while. We're going to check in with the anti-pope and see what he's up to. He's doing evil stuff. Nothing new there. He asks his cardinal to bring him this ancient grimoire that he's going to use to summon these creatures called the Mumblers. He's tired of there being a calm, a peace, a sort of standstill right now. Ever since Abaddon got destroyed, the demons and everything, like Abaddon was kind of like the head general, like leading the forces. And so since his destruction and death, he, the war kind of like sat still for a while. And so the anti-pope's trying to reinitiate the attack. And he wants to do that by summoning these creatures called the Mumblers. And the Cardinal's very afraid of this because apparently these Mumblers were existing before time itself, before creation. They existed in the darkness before, and there's no controlling them. Once they're set loose, there's no telling what they'll do. Hell doesn't control them. Heaven doesn't stand a chance against them. They're these super powerful demonic creatures. And it's just bad news bears. And then we also see that Amon is gearing up and riding on a skeleton horse, and he's leading the Necro soldiers into battle. And it seems like all hell's coming for humanity and New Hope. Then we jump back over and we see that New Hope is being bombarded. The attack's begun. Things aren't looking good. Matthew is having dreams or nightmares that are very prophetic. They're giving him visions. He's seeing Daniel when Daniel was still a human, and he's sort of getting like these prophetic visions. And the way I kind of read this was maybe it's God. I mean, whenever there's some kind of like prophetic dream or whatever, it's always some kind of bigger spiritual entity. And since God is like such a in-your-face presence in this particular story, I think God is trying to speak to Matthew and by feeding him these dreams of his uncle. And the message that dream Daniel is giving to Matthew is, you need to stay with your mom. That's the most important thing, is stay close to your mom. And so Daniel wakes up and he's panicked, he's in a sweat. And then he finds out that there's a big military movement. They're going to take like this giant train that goes straight to New Vatican, and it's armored and it's got tons of guns in it. And they think, okay, this is going to be the final assault. All of humanity is on the line here. So it's do or die. And Madrid is going on the train to attack New Vatican to hopefully end this war. Matthew obviously is upset because this is an absolute suicide mission. There's no hope, but that's the state of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, he tries to say, I'm going to. And
yeah.
She's like, no, you're not. You're staying here. And he's like, no, I have to go. I have to be with you. She's like, not this time. So yeah, he's devastated.
And she doesn't have the context of his dreams either. She's kind of among the other people, these outsiders that didn't see what Daniel was. Like, Matthew is the only one that really knows the connection. Still, Madrid hasn't made the connection that she's actually related to Daniel, that she's related to this hellspawn. And so there's that goes like level of disbelief.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying about how Daniel, or Matthew rather, so similar to Cyan in the main series.
Mm-hmm. Because she's just a 2-year-old kid who believes a 2-year-old kid or whatever, right? Like, no one can kind of glimpse her experience and what she's been through. And that's very similar to what's happening to Matthew here. No one wants to accept the unbelievable things that he has to tell. And so, they all gear up, they all get on the train, and, this is humanity's last stand. Let's see. Then we kind of get like this montage of Daniel and Abel going into New Vatican. It seems that the voice in Daniel's head, God, is telling him that he needs to go to New Vatican, and so they go there. and we check in with them briefly. They're fighting a bunch of demons. We see the train blasting through the wilderness and it's getting attacked by demons. We see humanity shooting a bunch of guns and stuff. The train gets overrun by the mumblers and it's not looking good. Like from the get-go, like we're just like 2 pages into their like just going to New Vatican and it's already going south. They're already overrun. Then Daniel and Abel make it into New Vatican and they make it to the anti-pope. They're standing in front of the anti-pope. He's like the Palpatine of this. He's the final boss. And the anti-pope is super, super arrogant, makes a complete miscalculation, absolutely underestimates what Abel and Daniel are there for and their capabilities. So he's like, I'm so evil and powerful, nothing can stop me, yada yada. And then Abel's like, oh yeah, watch this. And then Abel rips his heart out. That's it. That's the end of the anti-pope. He's done. But then Daniel's like, that was too easy. That was way too easy. Like we just walked in here. Like we fought some demons and we walked in here. No way. And then Durgis. Yes, that Durgis. The Durgis from the Angela arc a couple episodes ago. He haunted her. He's the specter of death. He's this primordial evil. The Durgis that Cagliostro met in the alley, that he's super afraid was somehow freed. That Durgis is here. And this is the final confrontation. He's the real final boss. So Daniel recognizes him, or the voice recognizes him. It's very vague here because as we, the readers, understand it, Durgis never came into direct contact with Daniel. So Daniel's speaking as if he knows who Durgis is. So I'm not entirely sure what this conversation is. Part of me, like when you look at stories, there's always 2 levels to it. There's the metatextual, that's all the behind the scenes stuff. That's the director commentary. That's the writer commentary. That's stuff you find on Twitter. And then you have intertextual. That's the text itself. That's the story that's being told and how you interpret it. So as the story presents it, it implies that Daniel somehow knows Durgis and we're just never told about it. Metatextually, though, if we're stepping outside of the story just for a moment, I think that this was kind of a way for Ellen McElroy to sort of wrap up the Durgis arc, because you have this character, or he introduced this character, Durgis. He fought Angela, then he tussled with Cagliostro in the alley. Cagliostro mentioned it in the previous arc with Tony Twist. He mentioned it to the Knights Templar. And you have like these brief mentions of who Durgis is, what he's about, but then we never got a conclusion to it. Well, this is kind of like his way of concluding that without having to interrupt or change whatever Todd McFarlane was doing in the main storyline. So this is the conclusion to Durgis's involvement in this story. This is the conclusion to Daniel's story. That's why before I said this is sort of Blood and Salvation is like the conclusion to the Curse of Spawn series, because Durgis was kind of the antagonist for several arcs, and it he was made up to be like this big villain, and here he is. This is the conclusion to the Dark Future arc, and it wraps up Durgis as well. So in a sort of weird lofty sense, this is the end of the Curse of Spawn series.
Yeah, this is where I was really like, wait, what's going on? Because we're told that Durgis is the face of the greatest of all evils, and he's telling Daniel, he's like, okay, all masks are off. You're revealed as what you are. He's like, run while you can. And then when Daniel says, well, I know what you are and I know you fear the light, then he says, well, what are you doing? You should be down on, your knees, blinded with fear. and I took that to mean like, okay, well, he's expecting Daniel to be subservient to him because they're sort of on the same side because he's assuming Daniel is a hellspawn and he should be evil. So I was like, wait, if he was on the side of good, he would run away from such powerful evil. But then on the
Mhm.
next page, he's saying you should be bending down your knee to me. So I was like, well, wait, which like does Durgis know that Daniel changed teams? Does he not? Like it was a little bit confusing. I wasn't sure if I missed something basically.
Yeah. It was very confusing. The first time that I was reading this series, I didn't know what Blood and Salvation was until I read it. And then when I read it, I'm like, who's Durgis? Because at that point I hadn't read Curse of Spawn yet, so I didn't
Gotcha.
have
Yeah.
that context. So that's the reason that I arranged in the Spawn reading order the way I arranged it, because um, we got the Angela arc, then we have like a brief break where we check in on Spawn and what he's doing, and then we get the Tony Twist arc, and then we get the Dark Future arc, and then we get this, because Durgis doesn't have a huge role in the overall Spawn series, and there's no reason to beat a dead horse to drag it out longer than it needs to be. So that's why I arranged it the way that I did. This is the last time we see Durgis, and he never shows up again. Who knows? Maybe in the future, Todd McFarlane will be like, hey, that Durgis guy, I'll bring him back. But for right now, this is it. So yeah, it's very abrupt. It's very, very quick. It's, he shows up for 2 panels and then he's gone. Like we see him in 2 shots, and then we see him in this nice this double page spread, and then that's the end of Durgis. Daniel's like, I'll offer you the thing that you fear most, and that's salvation and forgiveness. We have no context for that. Maybe, I don't know, like my imagine wants to go to like, what's Durgis's backstory? Why would he fear forgiveness? Why would that be the thing that destroys him? So that just makes my creative mind like go in all sorts of different directions. But in the context of this story, we have no context. So it feels very odd and ham-fisted.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it's also interesting that Daniel says the victory's been written on the world since the beginning, you lose. So like again, I mean Daniel really has gone all the way over to the side of good so much so that he knows that the side of good was destined to prevail. Maybe that's why he switched sides, or maybe he gained that knowledge through being touched by God earlier when he helped Abel be purged of evil.
yeah, maybe. I mean, in this picture, Daniel has that sort of heavenly light coming out of him. And we
Yep.
haven't seen something like that, come out of a hellspawn before. So maybe this is actually God. I mean, maybe God is the one speaking through Daniel, because we know that God is a voice in his head right now. So maybe Daniel is just like the avatar, the vessel with which God is speaking through. It's very vague. It's very vague, and it's hard to draw hard conclusions. So yeah, that's the end of Durgis. Daniel incinerates him in this kind of heavenly light. Durgis can't handle, whatever it is that he's dishing out, this hardcore forgiveness. He just can't stand it, and he just goes up in an absolute puff of smoke. He's obliterated. Um, and then we jump back over to what's happening on the train. Everything's going south in Madrid, and Matthew are like, okay, we need to get out of here now.
Yeah,
And
we should mention when everything was going crazy earlier, Madrid did find Matthew stowed away
oh,
on the train.
yes. Sorry, I got caught up. Yeah, so earlier, when they were on the train and being attacked and everything by the mumblers and the demons, and they were being completely overwhelmed, Matthew just pops out. He's just like, hey, I'm
Hey, mom.
here. I snuck on and you didn't see me. And Madrid is very upset. So yeah, we're popping back over to them, and they're hoping that they can get off this train by jumping into like the ashes of people that have been burned and everything. And
Yeah, that's
um,
such a great line. He's like, Mom, we got to jump. She's like, we're going too fast. And Matthew says, pray the ashes of the dead cushion our fall. I
yeah,
mean, that is an awesome line.
yeah, that one's good. And then we see Crane. He is very near death, and so he initiates a self-destruct sequence, and the armies of Hell and Amon are, they don't see it coming. Amon says, I must say this about humanity. They are a hardy breed. So they all get incinerated. They go up in white light and they're done. They're gone. Supposedly, this is the end of Hell's armies. They are completely defeated. Humanity has come out victorious. And so after being absolutely destroyed, we're going to jump to their head honcho sitting in the 12th circle of Hell, the archdemon Phlegethanyar. He goes on a tirade. He is upset. He is so angry that he just lost. Apparently, he sank everything into this, and it did not pan out the way that he thought. He just goes on a huge tirade. He's like, hell's better than heaven anyway. There's all this freedom and stuff, but at first it starts off sounding very philosophical, like he's very put together. He's very articulate with how he's saying, and, it almost sounds like you could side with him. But as he goes on and on with this argument, as he continues on and on, he gets more and more belligerent and just shows his true colors. He is a demon. He is the Lord of Demons. And he is like, I murder who you want to murder, blah, blah, blah. He's so upset that he becomes belligerent, and he just trails off at the end of this long, long speech. And he's just defeated. And at the end of this huge tirade of him just throwing a fit, he says, oh God, I want to come home. I'm so lonely. And it was pretty cool. I don't know. It worked for me. I liked that this cosmic being that, was supposedly, he's been around for eons. Who knows how long, since the fall. Like, we don't really get a whole lot of backstory on these giant demonic lords. They're so macabre and strange that we just kind of assume they've always been this way. But this line kind of suggests that Phlegethanyar and maybe even Malbolgia, maybe these creatures, these demonic lords of hell, were once angels that fell with Lucifer, fell with Satan. So maybe, he's just tired and wants to go back to the way things used to be. So after this huge tirade, after trying to end the world and losing, he's just upset that he doesn't have anyone there with him. And so he's alone. I don't know. There's something very not punctual. I don't know what the word is. Poignant. It's very poignant that after having all this power and coming so close to victory, that ultimately he just wanted company. I don't know. There's something very human about that.
Yeah, he goes a little violator here with his whining and his diatribe, trying to sound all threatening. It's clear he can't believe he lost. But then at the end, yeah, he's just like a lost.
Admit that he lost.
Yeah, he's just a lost little boy in a lot of ways. He's gonna.
The demon weeps.
Yeah, the demon weeps.
And then on the final page of this one shot, we check back in with Madrid and Matthew, and he asks, what now? And Madrid says, we give thanks, Matthew. We give praise. And he's like, I love you, Mom. I love you too. And that's it. That's the conclusion of the Dark Future arc. That is the conclusion of the Dirges and all that. Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of art style to wrap all this stuff on, but I feel like, I don't know, overall the story worked for me. I feel like there definitely could have been like a handful of revisions, maybe take out a lot of the extra scripture. The scripture stuff didn't really land. In a couple instances, it actually kind of fit because it would set like a certain scene or parallel a certain scene. But for the most part, it was just kind of like, this is the end of the world. This is the end of the world. more end of the world. Did you forget? I don't know. It was just lots of apocalyptic verses. And it's like, okay, we already know that the world is ending. We already know that these are like the end times. You don't need to remind us on every page from like all these different Bible verses. I don't know. Part of me like almost thinks that McElroy was like, I'm just gonna scour the Bible for all this stuff to kind of like fill in some of the spaces here. I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking exactly, but it didn't that part of the story did not land for me.
Yeah, that's where it really fell down for me also. And I don't know if it's my, 9 years of Catholic school, but you do see on the screen there the credits, everybody. So yeah, Alan McElroy, story, art by Ashley Wood, as we said, Richard Starkings, and comic crafts, Oscar Gongora, on lettering, and then designed by Brent Ash. But so yeah, I mean, when you're talking about Armageddon, you're talking about apocalypse, it makes sense to go to Revelation, which is the book in the Bible that deals with the end times and all the stories about trumpets and bowls and horsemen and all that kind of stuff. The thing is, it's like the story that McElroy's telling. Sometimes the verses that he chose line up with what's happening in the story for the most part, maybe like 80%. But other
Mhm.
times, the verses barely line up. It only lines up like 10%. So especially on this double page, because the verse is talking about a woman, and I was totally lost. It says, came out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, you will not receive her plagues. I'm like, who is she? Who is her? It doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. There's no female character in the book except for Madrid, and I guess Civ, but clearly not talking about her. So yeah, I was like, I read that, I went back and reread that page like 4 times. I'm like, am I missing something here? And I'm like, oh wait, it's a quote. So, it's a scripture. So I'm not, I'm just, again, I'm not sure. There are times where it doesn't land.
Yeah.
Like,
The
like they
letterboxing could
say.
have also been better because whenever it jumps into that scripture, it looks just like any other text. It looks like it's in line with the story. So you don't know entirely that you're reading scripture until you get to that point where everyone realizes, oh, yeah, this is definitely a Bible verse. When it gets like too, floral with the language, so to speak. They could have like easily have just created like a letterbox or something, or like a little scroll
Yeah.
or something, and then just slap the Bible verses in that. So it's like very clearly this is a Bible verse. It's related to what you're seeing, but you know, it isn't like characters speaking. It isn't like actions being dictated.
Yeah, because I mean that's the thing. Even in the world building in the first couple pages, it's pretty flowery language, and there's lots of scripture there, and you're just like, okay, what? Not that everything is not important, but what context am I reading these words in? You
Yeah.
know. So the story does really pick up after the first couple pages, where you start getting some characters talking and interaction. And again, I would actually encourage anybody who's going to read this to like go through and read it like as much as you can. Try to read it like a regular comic, and then go back through and don't read anything and just like look at the picture, just look at the art, because you'll
Hmm.
get a different experience. Or you may want to go the other way. You may want to look, flip through and look at the art first, and then go back and read the words. But it's definitely one of those comics where I feel like the melding of the actual text and the art, it's not as seamless as it is on some other books.
Yeah,
It's
I
definitely,
agree.
yeah, it's definitely a different sort of animal.
It's a very, very different style. And for anyone who's been keeping up with the Spawn series, the regular Spawn series, the Curse of Spawn, any of the side series that we've been doing, like this is a huge departure from any of those styles. All of those styles were pretty concrete. Like, yeah, you have moments of very abstract kind of stuff. I mean, the entire Cygor series, that whole 6-issue series was very odd. Um, but for the most part, you could actually tell what is happening because everything's very physical. This person's talking, that person's talking. And here, almost everything is like a specter. It's everything's so ethereal and so formless, but you can still make out what these things are. It's a very interesting art style. I love Ashley Wood's stuff. He is an incredibly talented artist, but it is very jarring to just be thrown into this and to use this kind of art style as like the concluding volume in that particular story arc. I just don't know if the art served the story the way that it could have or should have.
Yeah, I mean, if this was its own thing, that would be, maybe a different story. But the fact that even the first 4 issues of that Curse of the Spawn that we talked about before, we talked about how traditionally comic booky the art is, except it's, if there's any departure from traditional comic art, it's that the detail in that from Dwayne Turner is dialed up to 11.
Yeah.
There's so much detail in it. But I mean, you put that side by side with this and you would never think, oh, this is sort of like part 5 of, that,
The story.
that story. This is part 5 of Curse of Spawn 1 through 4. This is like Curse of the Spawn 4.5, if we're talking like Marvel numbering or what have you. So yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of value in it. I think, the art is cool. Was it the best choice to tell the story? I don't know if it was.
That's up for debate.
Yeah.
Personal taste.
Yep, exactly. But it was cool to see Daniel again. It was cool to see Dirtis, it is sort of a straight, he does feel a little bit shoehorned in when he shows up at the end, they kill the anti-pope and you feel like, all right, they killed the bad guy. And then all of a sudden this other guy pops up, but only for 2 panels, only for 2 pages. And then he's dead too.
He's the real final boss.
Yeah. And so it was like, well, I guess all humanity needed, for this war they've been fighting for what feels probably like centuries, but is more likely decades. All they needed was for, a hellspawn to change sides. And then there's the whole aspect of, which we talked about when we talked about Curse of the Spawn 1 through 4 of this. I mean, you gotta think of this as a possible future, right? Otherwise, why are we bothering to read the regular series if we already know the end of the story?
Right. This is a potential future. It doesn't necessarily mean it is the future.
Yep.
It's for all intents and purposes, think of it as sort of like B canon, like sub canon, or just non-canon altogether. It's an interesting application of the concepts that Todd McFarlane invented for the Spawn series, thrown into a Terminator-esque future post-apocalyptic setting.
Yeah, I'll say the other thing that the art does, you bring up the whole Terminator thing. We talked a lot about that last episode, how much those first 4 issues of Curse of the Spawn feel influenced by Terminator. One thing that this art style does that Ashley Wood has is it does dial that back a little bit. Because this feels more like religious or supernatural because of the art style. So that may have had something to do with McFarlane deciding to, hey, if we're going to finish off this story, let's, dial back the feeling of tech. Because if you remember, or if you listeners joined us for that episode, Curse of the Spawn 1 through 4, even when Daniel himself is unmasked, he's not just this, body of necroplasm. He's got all these cables and all this metal, and he feels very, very tech. There's no villain, there's no character, there's no images that we get in this one shot that feel like they're tech. Everything feels magical and supernatural and biblical and kind of end time. So, and again, that's what Ashley Wood is known for, and he definitely nailed it.
In that sense, it's a huge success because it definitely, set itself apart. And since this story was kind of leaning into, that more spiritual, ethereal sort of, storyline with all the scripture and all that, I guess in that sense, the art does service the story, in that particular theme.
Yeah, and I will say, in terms of this being a 4.5 of Curse of the Spawn, I mean, good thing that it wasn't, first of all, because it would have been like 4.5 or maybe 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, because it's like 60 pages. Man, anybody who was like digging on Dwayne Turner's art would have been like, upset. Yeah, they would have been like, what is this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, completely different.
Yeah. And I don't know. Like the reason that I didn't put the Dark Future arc earlier in the timeline, because it's removed, you could kind of place it anywhere. Like
Yeah.
when it first came out, it could have been the first Spawn content that you read. The only reason I didn't do that is because you sort of need the context of who Durgis is to
Yep.
understand that last little bit. And to do that, you need to read the Angela arc. You need to read that Tony Twist arc. So, that's the reason I arranged it the way that I did. We needed to spend some time with those characters in those stories. So I felt like this was kind of like the right spot to do it.
Yeah, and man, I think that this future world or possible future world of Spawn, with Daniel Lozano, with these other characters, man, I'd love to see Al Simmons do a little time traveling and end up there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in the time between the Curse of the Spawn issue 4,
Mm-hmm.
where it ends with Daniel's hand coming back out of the ground, and the start of this.
Yeah.
Like what other battles as Daniel was healing, and like maybe you do it where Al Simmons shows up as Daniel's climbing out of that wreckage that, from that explosion that killed, Abaddon. And then
Mhm.
the reason that Daniel is in such good shape at the beginning of this is because, Al Simmons showed him the ropes. Simmons helped him
Yeah.
heal, and they can do some battle and whatever. Just, I
That'd be
don't know. I'm
cool.
just, yeah, just something different for the regular Spawn series to do, to jump into a possible future, kind of shades of that real famous X-Men arc, like Days of Futures Past, right? Where
Hmm.
Wolverine went, to the future, and everybody knows the cover of him and Kitty Pryde, and behind him on the wall is the wanted poster of all the X-Men, and some are already dead and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so classic. So yeah, I
It
mean,
also
just
reminds me of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series. After that show ended in season 7, Joss Whedon continued it as a comic
as a
series
comic. Yep.
for several more seasons, from like season 8 to season 12.
Yep.
And he tied in a bunch of his future content. He had like a mini series called Frey that was about a future Slayer, and he managed to tie that series that set like thousands of years in the future or something, and Buffy travels to the future, and then Frey travels to the past, and you got that cool like the future meets the past, and they inform each other's decisions, and one eventually leads into the other.
Yeah, it's a great idea, Todd. If you're listening, if you want to sell more collected editions, because if you did tie the regular series in, and you've got those editors' notes that say, "Oh, Daniel first introduced in Curse of Spawn 1 through 4."
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely great idea. So,
Yeah, and with
uh,
Spawn's universe right now, it'd be a good time.
yeah, yep, exactly. So, all right. Well, I think that's it. Any last thoughts, Blake, on Spawn: Blood and
No,
Salvation?
that's pretty much it. It's a very interesting one shot, and this is not the last time that we've seen Ashley Wood.
Yeah, curious if the other one goes crazy with the biblical stuff. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. So that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. We appreciate everybody joining us. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe. So just go to your favorite podcasting app or podcasting platform on your smart device. Do a search for the Comic Source and subscribe. We appreciate the support as always, and we'll talk to you next time.
Later.